I'm going to tie a very productive little panfish fly today. This is called the Bluegill Fly. Ran across this fly a number of years ago. The Kentuckiana fly fishers did a video on this fly. If I'm not mistaken, a gentleman by the name of Roy Weeks was the creator of this fly. They did a video where he showed how he tied this. Like I said, I'm in the Midwest here, and we are big into panfish and bass. And therefore, any of these little panfish flies that people come up with that are not only fun to fish, but fun to tie, I tend to gravitate towards. So this is called the Bluegill Fly. It's a simple pattern. It is similar to a fly called the It's a Bug that I've done some videos on. There will be links down in the description. But it has lots of action to it, lots of life. It's a simple fly to tie. It has produced very, very well. So if you like to get out in the summer months, especially in the evening, some still pond water or even on the rivers, and you got some nice bluegill panfish around, the Bluegill Fly is definitely a winner. So I'll get started tying. Start the Bluegill Fly by putting my hook in the vise using a Mustad R74 and a size 6 for this. I like a longer shank hook for this. It gives it a little bit more foam, floats a little bit better in my opinion. You could certainly do an R73, which is a 3X long hook, or even something a little shorter if you want. I'm going to debarb the hook. For thread, I'm using a Wapsi UTC 140 Denier in black. I'm going to wax my thread, and I'm going to attach it about an eye length behind the eye of the hook. And I'm going to run it down. It's just going to give me a little base layer of thread. And run it down to just past the point of the hook, not quite to the bend. Our first material for the Bluegill Fly is some Marabou. I'm going to use some black Marabou. When you see the fly tied, you'll understand there's a lot of different variations you could do with this. So if you wanted to use a Marabou that matches up with the particular foam that you're using, you certainly could do that. You could also, do a contrast, which is kind of what I'm doing with this one. I'm going to take just an average Marabou feather. This is a good fly if you've got any kind of short Marabou feathers, but that are kind of full on the end. I'm going to wrap that down, still working my way down the hook shank a little bit, getting that tied in about a hook shank long. I'm going to wrap forward, and I'm going to use some of that Marabou to kind of bulk up the body on this fly. I want to stay a good 2 eye lengths behind the eye of the hook here. We'll be tying in our foam right there about an eye length behind the eye of the hook. So I don't want to end up crowding that space. And I'm going to secure all the excess Marabou down, run my thread back down to the end of the shank here, not quite to the end of the body. This is where I'm tying in the foam. I'm using a 2 mil foam here. This is a yellow. There are other popular colors for this, which I'll cover in just a little bit, but I'm using a yellow. I want to trim that foam so it's about the gap of the hook. I'm then going to trim a little point to the end of that. And this is just to help tie it in a little bit. I'll place that right up onto the hook shank and start wrapping that in fairly loose, but kind of snug wraps, not super tight because I don't want to cut through the actual foam. And then I'll snug that down as I go back and forth right up to that marabou. I want it so that when this is forward, you don't see any exposed thread wraps on that marabou. Now I'm going to tie in some wire here. I'm using a Danville. It's a medium fine wire in gold. And this is simply to reinforce the Peacock herl body we're going to put on this. I'm going to secure that in along the hook shank. Bring my thread all the way back down to the end of the body right next to that foam. The body is just Peacock herl. I'm using some strung Peacock herl. Get yourself about 6 nice long Peacock herls. I'm going to even the tips up, and then I'm just going to trim those tips so that they're all nice and even. I'm going to attach that right in front of that foam, work my way up forward, securing in the rest of that herl, bring my thread right to just about an eye length, 1.5 eye lengths or so, right behind the eye of the hook. Now I'll apply the Peacock herl, and then I'll also apply that rib. Hopefully you noticed there that I tied in that rib counter wrapped from the way that I tied in or wrapped in the herl. And the reason for that is the rib is just here to protect that herl. That Peacock herl, the original recipe does not have a rib in it, but that Peacock herl is pretty fragile, and it's very, very easy for especially panfish or little sharp teeth to clip some of that Peacock herl, and then it unravels. This fly is going to get torn up anyway. Hopefully you're going to be catching so many fish that it just gets all torn up, but at least that rib will help that Peacock herl last a little longer. Some different ideas on this. Instead of Peacock herl, you could use some chenille, or you could possibly even dub the body. I'm going to take the foam and I'm going to fold it forward. Now, instead of just tying it in right here like this, I want to push that foam backwards and develop a little bit of a gap essentially back here. And I usually will measure that by the back here should be about the same distance as the bend of the hook. What this does for me by providing that little opening is it traps air as you're fishing this and as you're popping this, and it'll pull that air down into the water, and it creates more disturbance. If you've ever seen a Kent stealth bomber, same kind of principle. Once that's secured in, I'm now going to fold the yellow back, but I want to use the foam to make a little bit of a head up here to the fly. So I'm going to push that foam forward to where the end of that foam, or that edge right there, is just past the eye of the hook. You can make that a little bit bigger if you want. Or put in about a half dozen wraps or so to secure that. And I'm going to trim this part of the foam so that it basically extends about a third to halfway down that back. Next, we're going to tie in our rubber legs. I'm using some medium round rubber legs in a yellow. I'm going to get 2 of these. I'm going to attach those on the top with just 3 wraps like that. Then I can collect the legs and slide them out to each side. You want to make certain that you're not pulling too tight on that thread, because we want these legs to kind of splay out a little bit. We don't want them to be, if you pull too tight, it pulls them into that foam and they tend to stick out more perpendicular than splaying out. They have more life and more action if they're splaying out a little bit. Now, at this point, if you want, the original fly is pretty much done. You would fold this back, bring it forward behind the eye of the hook, put in a few wraps, put your whip finish in, cut the thread off. We still have some work to do on the legs, but we have that to do anyway. Now, I've taken to recently, since I'm right here, tying in some Peacock herl and putting just a few wraps of Peacock herl in, just to, I don't know, it kind of dresses it up a little bit. It makes it look a little more finished on the end here. It certainly adds a little bit of bulk such that my legs will then stick out a little bit more. Keeps them from getting kind of pulled in together. So I just tie in 3 Peacock herls like that, and I put in 4 or 5 wraps. I bring this up around my side here. Couple, 2, 3 wraps to secure those in. And you can trim away the excess. Just kind of adds a little bit of a finish right there in there. Not that I'm worried or concerned about the thread wraps somehow adversely affecting the fly, not at all. I just think it looks a little bit more finished. I'll put in a couple more wraps, not too tight. Now I will fold the head back, bring my thread underneath to right behind the eye of the hook, and here I'll go ahead and put in a 4 or 5 turn whip finish. That will secure my thread. Before I put any head cement on, I got a little work on the legs to do. Now, you could use some barred rubber legs or even some silly legs if you want on this. I chose just the plain round rubber legs because I wanted to share a technique with you. This is something that I learned from Charlie Craven years ago when I did a class and taught his Charlie Boy hopper. You can take your regular round rubber legs and actually add an effect to them that essentially is barring them, but without actually having to, put individual stripes on them. You do that by taking a Sharpie, just a black Sharpie here, or you could use another color if you want. You're going to take one of the legs, and I intentionally cut these a little bit long. I'm going to cut them back in a minute, but it also makes it easier for this technique. So I'm going to pull the leg just a little bit, but more importantly, I'm going to rotate this about 1 full turn counterclockwise. Then I'm going to just put a stripe down one side of those rubber legs like this. When I let go, as you can see, I get a pseudo barring effect. It's a quick and dirty technique if you want to add a little bit more contrast to your flies. I did a video on the Chernobyl ant last week and mentioned that a lot of your fish, when they look up, are mostly going to see a silhouette. Now, if they do get close enough, they're going to see some color, and then they may also see that contrast, and it may be just the difference that, it takes. Otherwise, if it's cloudier water, if they're deeper, the sun's directly above or whatever, then whether these are barred or not isn't going to matter. They're just going to be more or less a black silhouette. But this is a simple, very simple technique, like I said, to add kind of pseudo barring to your legs on some of your terrestrial patterns. I'm going to trim these a little bit shorter. I want them still to have a lot of life and wiggle, but I don't need them quite that long. I might, if you needed a measurement, probably the length of the body, something like that. You could trim the front ones a little bit shorter if you want. Head cement, I'm going to put some head cement right in these thread wraps around that Peacock herl just to help hold that together a little bit, and then right behind the eye of the hook. Again, be careful not to crowd too much. If you are crowding over that eye, it gets difficult to actually tie that to your leader and fish the fly. But there you have it. That is the bluegill fly, rather with some variants that I do. Fun little pattern. It floats really, really well. I think the Peacock herl body adds a nice effect to it. I think Peacock is a great fishing material and fly tying material, as well as the rubber legs. This is similar to a fly I've done in the past called It's a Bug. There is a smallmouth version and a panfish version, but it is just a nice high riding terrestrial-ish type of bluegill fly. So that's the bluegill fly, and thanks for watching today. Thanks for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.